Okay, so uh, in this game, this is round four. It's against Jin Ma, who is a 1960 rated opponent. He's around very similar strength to me. Um, so we have e4. He plays the just standard plan. We get a Roy Lopez, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, and I play the queen e2, 5 queen e2 line, Wormald attack. I like this move, queen e2, because it's a bit of a sideline, but the plans are very similar to the standard Roy Lopez, where you play c3, maybe d4 eventually, but potentially even d3 and transfer the knight from b1 over to the queen side or to the king side. Um, and then you can get an attack on the king side, which is what happens sort of in this game. We don't really get the attack in this game, but okay, so this is the plan. My opponent knows it very well. B5, bishop b3, bishop c5, c3, d6, castles, castles, rook d1, bishop b6, d3. Okay, d3. Now my plan is to transfer the knight. Um, Black has done a good job of preventing d4 at this point, so now we go for transferring the knight. h6 is a good move. It's my opponent probably knows his position better than I do because I was not aware that h6 was a move here. It seemed fine to me. I wasn't thinking that it was a bad move, but I just didn't know really the position at this point. Knight e7, knight f1, knight g6, knight g3. So both players transfer the knight to the king side. I do it mine for the f5 square, and in contrast, black is playing for the f4 square. And also just the knights are good defenders of the king. Rook e8, I play a4, trying to make another weakness on the other side of the board to play against. Bishop b7. So bishop b7 uh, is probably aimed at stopping me from playing d4 as easily, more pressure on the e4 pawn, and also is just developing move to protect the rook. If I take on b5, takes on b5, the rook is not hanging on a8. Bishop e3. I wasn't totally sure what to do at this time. Maybe just a waiting move like h3 is better. Um, it also prevents knight g4. But bishop e3 I didn't think should be bad. Bishop takes, I even considered taking with the f pawn, but I didn't really like the positions that I would be getting or the ideas that would be occurring after takes, f takes. Eventually, I thought d5 would happen, and I don't want to take because that might allow some e4 push. And I can't leave it there either because then if I allow a capture, my e pawns would be doubled. This would be here, this would be here. So I didn't like that. So in the end, I just took with the queen. F takes also fine. Both moves are fine. C5 now. I take, and then here I play probably controversial move. Um, I play the move c4 to close the position, stop d5 break from ever happening. And the position that will result after black eventually plays b4, either with or without the inclusion of taking on a1 first, is that my light square bishop is sort of stuck inside of the pawn chain. It becomes a bad bishop. Whereas the black bishop is a good bishop. It's hitting pawns. Um, it can wrap around through c8 maybe, or just put pressure on the center. For the reason I did this though is because c4 sort of shuts down the idea of d5 happening. Uh, unless there's some tactical resource where if I take, then there's a pawn push. One of these pawns can be pushed. Um, so that was the idea of it. It felt like I could, if I shut down the center, I have better chances of taking over the a file, maybe playing on the king side if the center's closed. So he takes on a1 first and then plays b4, which makes some sense. Now um, I don't have time for this move bishop a4. If I play bishop a4, there's queen a5, pinning the bishop to the rook on a1. Um, and the issue is that rook a8 will come. And if I ever play b3, eventually the bishop will go to c6, putting more pressure. And if I, at that point, have defended it with something, even a knight can come to b6, and there would just be too many black pieces attacking the bishop on a4. Likely, I will be forced to sacrifice a pawn, and this b pawn, if it ends up becoming passed, will be very problematic. So, queen d2 move. Point of queen d2 is twofold. One, to get out of the way of knight g4. Two, to not get in the way of bishop d1, that's where I want to put the bishop. I want to transfer the bishop over to the king side, where it can maybe find some life. And it felt just like a nice improving move of the position. The queen on d2 is very, it's like the glue of the position. It protects all areas of the board and allows for other pieces to maneuver around it very freely. Bishop c6, knight f5, queen d7, knight e3. I transfer my knight from g3 to e3, and I do this in order to access the center square, where the knight, if captured, I will take with the c-pawn, and then my bishop will have a new way of getting into the game, and it will actually be a very useful piece there. Knight f4, I play knight e1. The problem here is if I play g3, then there's queen h3. And if I take the knight, then my knight on f3 is hanging, and position becomes very bad. So I have to prepare that g3 move with knight e1, which also defends g2 a second time, which I thought couldn't hurt. Knight h7 I felt was a little bit slow plan. It allows g3. I wasn't totally sure what he should do, but I felt maybe knight g4 was a little bit more active. The idea being that after takes, I'm threatening maybe to go knight h3, but more importantly, rook e6, rook g6, and the a8 square is covered for now with the bishop. So I wanted to check there, and if I try to infiltrate with rook a6, which is probably what I would have to do, it felt like maybe I would be a little bit slow there. But knight h7, okay, fine move. g3, a check, king g2, knight g5, knight 3-8, g5. And he wants to go queen h3 check. Okay, so I have a choice here. Do I play h4 or not play h4? In the game, I decided not to play h4. Um, uh, Maybe I should have played h4, but I didn't think it mattered that much. The problem here is that I missed that this pawn is pinned to my king from the bishop. So I play bishop d1, and then this move f5 comes. And luckily I'm okay, but it's not good to miss moves like this because it's possible they can just win. Here I'm okay. I play the move f3. Position is not pleasant by any means, but I'm not losing. And uh, if black is careless, then sometimes things can start to turn around. Okay. f4. Now I need to move my knight. Uh, so I put it on f5. And then on f5 I thought was good because it hits d6. Um, it's sort of covering the king side still, so I should be okay against any sort of attack. Knight e6 is a good move, going to this central d4 square. I have that covered right now because my knight can can take on d4, and in that position wouldn't be that great for black because if this pawn takes, then this pawn is weak, and if this pawn takes, then this pawn is weak. So I'm not super worried about that at the moment. I've just played b3. The idea of b3 is to play rook a6 and queen a2, something like this, and then try to infiltrate on the queen side to get some counterplay against what is clearly a kingside attack from black. Rook f8, I play rook a6, which is, you have to get this counterplay, or this this area over here is just going to collapse. Takes. And now taking is not accurate. I think my opponent was hoping that I would try to do something like rook takes c6, There's a fork on e7. So I think after takes, my opponent was hoping maybe I would take on c6, and then you throw in this check, and I would be probably in some trouble. But I just recapture, and now without this without this pawn on f4 putting pressure on my position, I'm sort of more free. Eventually, I might be able to develop my bishop out by playing at timely f4 if this knight moves away, as it does in the game. Right now. Knight d4, also not a very accurate move, because after takes takes, I can play f4, um, like this. And now, my bishop, which has been, you know, theoretically was a very bad piece after I played the move c4, it comes to life either on the long diagonal, it can even go to g4 or h5 at certain times. And I don't really have many issues in this position. I have control over the a file, I have good center control. This pawn can never advance. I have not a majority on the king side, but probably, this knight is sort of dominated for the time being. So if anyone's better here, I would say now at this point it's white, although probably there's some sort of equality to be found. Bishop b7, rook a2. I play rook a2 and not rook a1 so that my pieces are more harmonious. These pieces are connected, protected, and maybe eventually I want the rook to swing across over here, not have to move these pieces. So knight f6, bishop f3, taking the diagonal, and now knight g4. And so now I have this decision to make. Do I allow the knight to come into e3, or do I just take it right now, get it off the board? I thought for some time here. In the end, I decided to take the knight, which the computer actually prefers over allowing the knight in. The move knight c2 I didn't really like, um, because it felt like it was I wanted my knight to develop to the king side. It was sort of just going to be getting in the way over there. I don't like the idea of my knight being defensive against his knight jumping into e3. Then every move I have to calculate, okay, can his knight jump into e3? So I take the knight, and then I play this move queen e2. Okay, queen e2 gives options to my opponent. Queen e2 at first looks like it blunders a pawn on f4. Rook takes f4. Similar to game one, actually, with this idea with using a pin to take a pawn. But after that, I just take the queen. Rook takes queen. This actually happens in the game. Um, takes, rook a7. And black has to do something very dramatic, which we'll get to in the game. But in this position, I was sort of just thinking that I can play forever. Yes, black is up a pawn. It's here. There's a 2-on-1 majority. But this bishop is such a terrible piece. The pawns are all on dark squares. I'll be able to get my knight eventually somewhere where it will be able to do some damage. And white, even though he's down a pawn, can never really be worse here. So I thought. The other move that black should really consider, and probably the better move, is to take the queen, rook takes queen, and then rook a8, take over the open file in the position. I wasn't that worried about this in the game because I thought that, okay, I can, worst case scenario, I'll be able to put the rook, use the knight on d2, supported by hopefully the king on e2, and the knight and king will hold off the rook on this b pawn. You can imagine the rook being on like a3 or b2, the knight being on d2, the king supporting the knight on say e2, and then I'll just be able to use my rook on the king side to hit some of these weaknesses, and it would be like a rook versus bishop over there. And I thought that I would be okay. And it turns out I would be okay, but it's not. If it's scary for anyone, it's scary for white. So that would have been the better try. Instead, rook takes f4 looks like a good move, but I would say definitely an inaccuracy. We go into this endgame, and now I played the move rook a7. And rook a7 looks like a very, very logical move. My main line went bishop c8. Then I was going to go rook, or no. My main line, not bishop c8, because that would lose a piece to rook a8. Bishop c6, I was going to go rook a6, bishop e8, I take on d6. I win my pawn back immediately, and I'm now about to start hitting these things. This rook is not going to be able to defend them very easily. and then I'll get my knight involved as well. And I thought that I could win this endgame. And this is why I went for this position. There's a move for black, though, that makes this very tricky, which is a piece sacrifice. Bishop takes e4. This move I saw was possible, but did not give enough consideration, because I just thought, okay, black's going to give me a piece for 2 pawns. My knight should be able to compensate for the 2 pawns sufficiently, and I will eventually be able to pick up pawns with my rook and win this game very simply. But no, this is very difficult position for white after rook takes e4. The problem is there's not a good way to defend b3. My b3 pawn is probably going to fall. My knight is attacked right now, so I don't have time for rook a2, rook b2. And if I play rook a1, um, there's just a check and rook b2. So this is a very scary position. I think I play the only way forward that doesn't lose, which is king f2, protecting the knight and getting my king closer to the queen side to stop these pawns from running. And then after rook e3, knight f3, I accept that I'm losing the b3 pawn, but I get this blockade. Well, okay, let's talk about it from here. I get a blockade where my knight goes to d2, protecting c4, and my king protects the knight. And while that's happening, it takes a very long time for this pawn to be pushed. By the time it gets pushed, first of all, my knight's covering the b1 square, so black needs to do something a little bit more. But by that time, my rook will have taken d6 and will be prepared on the b file to take on the b pawn as well. It's still very, very difficult even at that point, but that was my plan, and it seemed to be a good plan. So I start with rook d6. If I start with knight d2, then there's the move rook d3. And then if I play king e2, he can take on g3. And then if I play rook d7 there, attacking this pawn, there will be the move rook g6. And rook g6 will protect the pawn and be winning endgame for black at that point. I will only have 1 pawn against many, 6 pawns, 1 versus 6. The knight cannot compensate for 5 pawns. It can barely compensate for 2 in a lot of scenarios. But okay, so rook d7 first, now not allowing that. Rook c3, knight d2 now. This is the defensive setup that I am hoping for. Knight defending the pawn, blockading these d pawns. There's a b pawn that can run, but king e2. He tries to run b pawn. I take on d6. I'm in time. b2, rook b6. We get this position. I have a knight for 3 pawns, so the material is technically equal if you were to just look at the point system. If you look at the specifics, though, you start to see trumps for both players, but particularly white, because the c-pawn, due to my defensive setup, where the knight defends the pawn and king protects the knight, they sort of keep the rook at bay. And then you start to see, okay, this 2-on-1 is not going to be very fast at all. And if you give me enough time, I'm going to play the move rook b3 and then king d3. This is the way that I plan to dislodge the rook. I play rook b3 so that on rook c3, if I play king d3 on my next move, so h5 played in the game. If I play king d3, rook c3 check would happen. So my idea is to play rook b3 first. Rook b3. Now black needs to be very careful. If you play a move that allows king d3, let's say g5, I'm sure if I play g5, this would be, oh, this race is still okay. I guess this race is still okay. Okay, so there's going to be a race. Probably you have to go for this. This is very interesting. I haven't looked at this yet. Yeah, so here, here, and black is actually in time to hold. Okay. If I take on h4, take on h4, take on b2, h3, how does this work? Take on h4, takes. I guess you have to start going with the king now. You have to start going with the king now. This is very interesting. This is actually table-based position. We can look. Yeah, king g7 and h3 both draw. But king f7 does not. Probably. King f7 does not draw because I will have a fork on g5. Okay, that's... I'll just put that on the board. There would be a fork. I attack the pawn, and then I fork, and I win. Okay, so this position would have been a draw, but I would say not easy to evaluate that from here, that you can play g5 in the races. It's by one tempo, probably. Okay, so we get that. In the game, though, rook c3 was played, which was my main move. This was the move I thought he had to play. I can't take it, but I can take on b2. So now we trade b for g pawns. And now I only have one pawn, still 3 pawns for a piece. And he's running these h pawns. So now maybe human would rather play black. It's very difficult to pick a side, though, but I was feeling relatively comfortable with white. Because of rook b5, I'm going to win c5 pawn. And then probably I will win d4 pawn. And then I will use my knight to stop these pawns with my king while this pawn runs. That's the goal. Rook g2, king d3, h4, takes, g5. Very important move. You need to do this. If you play h3, I think I'll be able to get behind the pawn. H2, just knight f3 maybe, and I should be able to collect. G5, I play the move rook f5. Move rook f5 is twofold. One purpose of rook f5 is to get back to f1 and stop these pawns, either with the knight or the rook, f1 square. And the second purpose is to cut the king off from getting to the f file. If the king wants to cross over, the king will need to go to g6 first, and that takes some time. And the c pawn is about to start running. In the game h3, knight f1, king g7, by the way, only real move. King h7 also possible, but you have to bring this king up. If you do something else, I thought in the game I remember thinking that king g7 was in inaccuracy, and after my next move, I was better. King g7, I played c5, and I thought it was going to be very difficult for black to stop this pawn. My king and knight do a very good job of preventing the rook from getting back to the c file. My rook is cutting the king off from coming over. But as it turns out, after h2 now, I have nothing better than to go for drawn rook endgame, which is unfortunate. I take, and I play c6. So I'm a pawn down, but I'm pressing here because the rook can't easily get back. Here the rook needs to go through h8 to get back. Instead, well, so rook h8, I take on d4, and king g6. And here, I play a very tricky move. Not winning, but tricky. So I play the move rook d5. And I encourage you to try to figure out how black draws this position. Because it's, to me, I saw this from a few moves before. To me, it was not clear that black could draw. It was clear what black's best try was, but it was not clear that black could actually make the draw. So, if you've taken some time, I can now explain what the method is. Essentially, you need to accept that you're going to need to sacrifice your rook for this pawn. This pawn will queen, and your rook will need to be sacrificed for it. What you need to do with black is make it so once the pawn is sacrificed, you need to get, or once the rook is sacrificed for the pawn, you need to make it so my king is far away, and your king and pawn will create enough counterplay that my rook will have to sacrifice eventually for your pawn. My king will be too far away to win the pawn. And the way to do that is with a move king h5. Without king h5, in the game, king f6 was played, and now white wins because of king c5, king b6. And your king is cut. This was the purpose of rook d5. Rook d5, the idea was to allow, also g4, I think probably also not working because your king's still cut. This is why I kept the rook on the 5th rank, and also why I couldn't put it on e5. Rook on e5, then there'd be like king f6 would hit the rook with a tempo. And if the rook was on c5, I wouldn't have this avenue. So rook on d5 is, I think, the best try. Okay, king f6, king c5, rook c8, king b6, and I am winning the game because the king is cut. In the game, this was tried. Now I have to take the pawn, but it's very easy to do this. I come back, and now I can just go to d1. The king is cut. My king is about to help my pawn queen. Rook b8 tried. King c7 here. Check. King goes back. King c8. Rook c2. c7. And on king f8, I build the bridge. So I go rook e4. Preparing to build the bridge. I want to go out. Check. Like let's say this is my plan. Here, a check. Here, a check. Here, defending the pawn with the king like this. Another check. And then I want to go king b4. And then on a final check on back on c2, I'll have rook b5, building the bridge and winning the game. I'll show that on the board just so you can see. So in the game, king f7 was played. So now if I try to build a bridge, king d7, check, here, check, here. In the game, king f8 was played, but let's just say rook d2. My plan was king c5, rook c2, rook c4. And now there's no stopping the pawn from queening. The king is too far away. But in the game, king f8, now I just play rook c5. I'm going to put the rook on c5 now. It's basically building a bridge, but at one tempo, or one row up. A check, king here, and I build the bridge, and my opponent resigns once the bridge is built. Okay, so that was this game. I thought it was a fairly accurate game from both players. There was a blunder in the end game, not playing king h5. Aside from that, though, we're in book for a while. We play a lot of either best or excellent moves the whole way. I would say probably c4 is controversial, maybe a controversial move, but the resulting position I don't think is I don't White can choose to be worse in a variety of ways. This is how I look at this position. White can choose to be worse in this position in a variety of ways. White is worse because the opening with queen e2 is not the most ambitious. Well, it's ambitious in some ways because I like to get this, you get this attack, you get this easy plans, but in terms of the computer evaluation, black is technically, if black plays well, doing fine or even better. So my opponent knew what he was doing, and so, position becomes not that great for white. It's fine. But in this position, black has an edge, and white can choose how he wants to be worse. And I chose to not allow anything to happen in the center, which is a personal preference because I want to keep the position closed. I don't care that my bishop becomes a little bit worse if I can control d5 break, and if I can see how I'm eventually going to get either the a file, I'm going to survive on the king side, and it just becomes hard for black to play to get a clear plan after c4. I sort of have all the squares covered and there's no more breaks other than f5, which sort of happens, but okay. So c4 I think is in the opening / middle game phase the most important move to analyze and review. And then I would say missing f5, even though it ended up not being a big problem. Like bishop d1 is actually a good move, but missing f5 is not good. I think that f5, maybe I see f5 and still play bishop d1, but important to see the move that is possible with this pin. Okay. And then, yeah, rook f8, maybe not the most accurate move. He should probably just continue with the attack, not allow me to get. I'm going to play for counterplay on the a file, so black needs to do something sort of fast enough. Not necessarily like immediate, but like you have to start building your attack. Rook f8, not really a move that is helpful because I think generally this rook is going to want to be lifted. You're going to want to keep pawn here for a while. And if any piece captures on f4, probably the knight. So you probably want to keep the rook on e8. But okay, so I get counterplay, and knight d4 also another inaccurate move that gives me free play. And then, okay, so queen e2. This move probably black should take and take the a file. If I wasn't that concerned about that, but maybe I shouldn't allow that and do something else. I was just very tempted by queen e2 because I saw that rook f4 gives him an opportunity to win a pawn, but I was very confident in my ability in this endgame. And then finally, playing rook a7 is probably um, just too fast. I think probably if I play maybe king f3 even, or knight f3, any move that doesn't allow this bishop sacrifice first will be good for white. It does give him a tempo, but okay, I'm still going to come inside, um, and my knight uh, will be able to do some damage along with the rook on this d6 pawn because his bishop is on light squares and not able to defend it. Maybe I'll get the knight to f5. Let's say like maybe knight f3, knight h4, knight f5. At that point, I'll be able to get my rook to either a6 or a7 or some square to attack, and I should be able to win my pawn back and with very, very active pieces. Okay, and that's it. And then the defensive setup with knight d2 was important, but we found that, and then both players played the endgame very well up until this one blunder, king f6 in the rook endgame, which is a very unfortunate blunder for my opponent, but very fortunate for me. So that was round 4. We're now on +1 again in this tournament. Or yeah, +1 in the tournament, 1 round to go. And yeah, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.